And so pneuma theou is the Spirit of God, and the word theou, if I hover over it, it's actually a genitive case. And what that means, it's a genitive in the masculine singular, a noun in the genitive case with the masculine singular number. And what this means when we say genitive, if you look that up, it's the part of grammar that connotes a connection of nouns and things with ownership or relation to one another, so that we can really say that it's God's Spirit, or we introduce the of word in English, the Spirit of God. If you want to put the word Spirit in front, like it shows up in the Greek, pneuma theou is Spirit of God. That's the genitive case, or God's Spirit. But in the same sentence, Paul also, if you notice here, let me keep them both so you can see them both. So we got pneuma theou at the first part, and then we also have, in the same case, pneuma Christou. And you can tell the case endings in Greek by the sound of the ending of the noun ou and ou. Pneuma theou and pneuma Christou, right? And Christou, if I hovered over it, is also a noun in the genitive masculine singular. Pneuma Christou is translated as Spirit of Christ, or if we want to take out the word of and just use an apostrophe, which is what genitive case does, it's Christ's Spirit. So we have God's Spirit and we have Christ's Spirit. So we go back and look at the English, and that's what Paul's saying. You, however, not in the flesh, but in the Spirit, if in fact you have God's Spirit dwelling in you, if God's Spirit dwells in you. Anyone who does not have Christ's Spirit, right, that's the way genitive works, does not belong to him. Again, I think that this is an inside peek at Trinitarian theology in Paul's writings, where he overlaps Spirit of God with Spirit of Christ seamlessly without skipping any words or without stopping to supposedly explain why he's going to use a different phrase. And it wasn't confusing in the first century. It's as challenging as it might be to us today, because we try to figure out why does he switch words. But in the first century, the frame of mind that was that people operated with in the biblical worldview was simply that God was complex, and that's it. He's not all knowable and all we can't fully understand him. We simply worship in the beauty, in the mystery of his complexity. And so if the Spirit of God dwells in you, but the Spirit of Christ dwells in you, and yet there's only one Spirit, like Paul teaches elsewhere, well, then that's God's business, right? That's God's complexity. Let's keep reading some of these. Let's cover just a few more verses. We're not going to finish this tonight. Like I said, I think I'll take 3 weeks for this excursus. In verse 10, he says, but if Christ is in you, what? Remember, the original Greek didn't have verse breakdowns. So in Paul's mind, he simply wrote, if in fact the Spirit of God dwells in you, anyone who does not have the Spirit of Christ does not belong to him, but if Christ is in you. So even if we want to say that Christ, if the Spirit of Christ is really a clever way of saying God's Spirit that he put in Christ, right? As if I could take my own spirit, like let me see, let's use like a different absurd example. Let's say that people are computers and the Spirit is a hard drive. You could take computer A and put the hard drive that belongs to Ariel. So it's this hard disk that I'm talking about in my computer. It belongs to me, this hard drive, and I can put it in computer A, and I can say that this hard disk that is in the computer belongs to me. So it's Ariel's hard disk, right? But it's in computer A. I could likewise take this hard disk out and put it in computer B. It doesn't mean that it's computer A's hard disk that lives in computer B. It's still Ariel's hard disk that lives in computer B. Understand my analogy here? So in that sense, when I move the hard disk from computer A to computer B, right, old computer, new computer, or something like that, it doesn't mean that the ownership of the hard disk transferred from me to computer A when I moved it from computer A to computer B, so that I should say the computer B's hard disk. It's actually really, all along, it's Ariel's hard disk. It belonged to me from the beginning. I purchased it. I just decided to put it in computer A and then move it to computer B. In this first analogy, we could perhaps say the Unitarians are saying that the Spirit of God that dwells in you is the Spirit that is in Christ because it's God's Spirit. He's the ownership factor. So the Spirit of Christ is not trying to say that it's Christ's Spirit, trying to say that it's God's Spirit, but it lives in Christ. That's the Unitarian perspective, is that God placed his very Spirit in Christ, and therefore that's what's going on in verse 9. So they don't see any difference they don't see any first person, third person going on with Spirit of God and Spirit of Christ like we Trinitarians do. However, I think that can't be accurate, because when we get to verse 10, Paul doesn't say, but if God is in you, as if to imply that it's simply God's Spirit when he used the phrase pneuma Christou, Spirit of Christ, as if it's still the ownership belongs to God, but he's just using a phrase to understand that it's through the person of the Son of God, right? As if God put his Spirit, his very own Spirit, into Christ, and then Christ in us represents God in us. I understand that there is a sense where that is true, but Paul doesn't phrase it that way.